We didn't notice the applause at first. What stood out was the pause right after it, the way a sentence landed heavier than the crystal glasses in the room. That pause belonged to Rosalind Harper, a woman whose place in her own family had been quietly reassigned long before anyone said it out loud. What followed was her voice. I was standing near the end of the table when my father lifted his glass and smiled toward the guests. "You won't need a boarding pass." "Rosalind," he said, loud enough for the room. "Someone has to stay back. The dogs, Victoria's kids, the house." The clink of silverware stopped. My mother's fingers tightened around her napkin. She didn't look at me. Victoria turned in her chair, already reaching into her bag. She pressed a thick binder against my chest. "Warm, heavy. Everything's in here," she said. "Feeding times, the humidifier settings. Don't improvise." I looked down at the binder, then at my father. He was watching, waiting for something messy. I felt my jaw lock, not from anger, from calculation. "Of course," I said. "Have a wonderful trip." The room exhaled. My father's hand landed on my shoulder, firm and approving. "That's my girl," he said. "Family makes sacrifices." We've seen moments like this before, the kind that look small to everyone else and permanent to the person standing in it. I nodded once, not because I agreed, because staying quiet was the only way to stay inside. If you've ever recognized yourself in a silence like that, you already know why this story matters. I didn't sit back down. I stood there with the binder against my ribs while the conversation slid past me. Easy again. Someone laughed too loud. Someone asked about flights. My mother leaned close, voice low. "You'll be fine here," she said. "It's just a week." I nodded. My hands were steady. That surprised me. Victoria was already scrolling on her phone. "Make sure the dogs eat separately," she added, not looking up. "And don't forget the bedtime routine. They get fussy." My father raised his glass again. "To Saint Bart's," he said. "We've earned it." The table echoed him, glass on glass. Celebration sealed. Inside, something settled, not hurt, not anger. A clear, reminding click. Staying quiet wasn't surrender. It was access. We've learned that silence can sound like agreement when people are eager to hear it. Later, as coats were gathered and chairs scraped back, my father paused beside me. "You did the right thing tonight," he said. "I knew you'd understand." I smiled because it was easier than correcting him, because smiling kept doors open. When the room finally emptied, I carried the binder with both hands. It felt heavier now, not because of the dogs, because of what staying meant. I didn't go upstairs. I went to the kitchen and set it on the counter, right where everyone could see it in the morning. By the time everyone went to bed, the house smelled like lemon cleaner and leftover champagne. I rinsed my glass, dried it, put it back exactly where it had been. Old habits. My phone buzzed. A message from Miles. Dad mentioned payroll flagged again. "Can you take a look tomorrow?" I didn't answer right away. I wiped the counter instead. Slow. Careful. Miles liked to pretend he was casual about money. He never was. He hovered when things got tight, paced when numbers didn't line up. At dinners, he talked about innovation. In private, he talked about gaps. The next morning, he cornered me near the coffee machine. "Just a quick fix," he said. "Nothing major. You're good at this." Victoria breezed past us, already dressed for travel. "Don't overwhelm her," she said lightly. "She's busy playing house." I kept my eyes on the mug. Coffee sloshed near the rim. Later, in my father's study, William slid a folder across the desk. Thick. Too neat. "These need to look cleaner," he said. "You know how?" I flipped the folder open. Payroll summaries. Contractor names I didn't recognize. Dates that overlapped in ways they shouldn't. "That timeline's tight," I said. "If anyone looks closely, his jaw set, they won't." he replied. That's why we have you. The room felt smaller then, not loud, just compressed. We've noticed how often pressure arrives wrapped in confidence, how trust is implied instead of earned. I nodded. Not agreement, containment. Back in my room, I opened my laptop and pulled up the files I'd saved months ago. Copies of copies. Quiet backups. I added the new documents, labeled them carefully, and closed the folder. That night, as suitcases rolled across the hallway, my father passed my door. Don't stay up too late, he said. You'll need your energy. I sat on the edge of the bed after he left, listening to the house settle. They thought they knew what I did all day. It happened late, after midnight, when the house finally went quiet. I was in my father's study, feeding old paperwork into the shredder the way I always did, one stack at a time. No rush. My laptop chimed. An email notification he'd forgotten to mute. I shouldn't have looked. I did anyway. The subject line was short, exposure. I opened it and felt the room tilt, just slightly. Miles had written first, if she pushes back on the filings, remind her whose name is on them. My father replied a few minutes later, she won't. Rosalind needs us, and if it ever turns, we say she handled it alone. She's careful and loyal. There was another line, casual, almost bored. She won't walk. Where would she go? My fingers stayed on the trackpad, cold, still. For a moment, the shredder hummed behind me, chewing through paper like nothing had changed. We've noticed how some realizations don't arrive loudly. They just take the air out of the room. I closed the email, didn't forward it, didn't print it. Instead, I opened a new folder on my drive, named it with a date, then another, and another. When I finished shredding, I shut the study door and leaned against it. Not crying, just breathing slower than usual. The next morning at breakfast, my father glanced at me over his paper. You get through those files all taken care of, I told him. He smiled, satisfied. That's why we trust you. I took a sip of coffee. It tasted burned. After that night, I still did the work. I just stopped erasing their footprints. Morning came loud. Suitcases thumped down the stairs. The dogs paced in tight circles, nails ticking against the floor. Victoria shouted from the hallway about a missing sandal. Someone laughed too hard. My father called me into the study and closed the door with 2 fingers. He didn't sit. He dropped a pair of envelopes onto the desk. Thick, unopened. Payroll, he said. Flagged again. Miles moved things around. You'll clean it up while we're gone. I slid one envelope closer and skimmed the header. Dates overlapped. Names repeated. This isn't cosmetic, I said. If they audit. His eyes sharpened. Fix it, he replied. And remember whose signature is on the returns. The words landed where he meant them to. We've seen this kind of pressure before, the kind that pretends to be practical. He reached into his pocket and held out his hand. Your key. I froze long enough to feel it register on my face. Then I reached into my bag and placed the key in his palm. Metal on skin. Final. That's better, he said. No coming and going. Keep things quiet. In the foyer. The driver waited. My mother fussed with her scarf. Victoria hugged me with one arm. Don't forget the dogs eat separately, she said, and keep the house neat. I will, I said. The door shut behind them. The engine pulled away. The house exhaled. I stood there a moment longer than necessary. Then I went to the drawer in the kitchen where I kept batteries and tape. I lifted the false bottom and took out the spare key. Copied months ago. For emergencies. For nights like this. I turned it over in my hand. Heavy. Ordinary. Upstairs. The dogs barked once, then settled. I put the key in my pocket and locked the front door from the inside. I waited until the house went quiet again. No engines. No voices. Just the refrigerator humming and the dogs shifting upstairs. I stepped outside and called Aunt Eleanor. She picked up on the second ring. "You okay? I need help." I said. The words came out flatter than I expected. For a few days. The dogs. And Victoria's kids. There was a pause. Not hesitation. Calculation. "I can be there by tonight," she said. "I'll bring the car seats. I'll leave instructions." I told her. "And their favorite blankets." "Of course you will," she said. "You always do." My throat tightened then. Just for a second. We've noticed how some people don't ask why. They just show up. After we hung up. I stood there with my phone pressed to my palm, letting the cool air settle me. Upstairs. A door creaked. One of the kids turned over in their sleep. I went back inside and started packing small bags. Leashes, snacks, notes written clearly. Nothing rushed. When I finished, I sat at the kitchen table and waited for Eleanor's headlights to turn into the drive. After Eleanor left with the kids and the dogs, the house felt larger than it ever had. Not empty exactly, just unobserved. I locked the front door, then unlocked it again. Old habit. Control check. The spare key slid into the lock easily. A soft click. Nothing dramatic. I went straight to my father's study. Didn't pause in the hallway. Didn't look at the photos on the wall. The desk drawer stuck like it always did. I pulled harder than necessary. Inside, folders stacked too neatly to be innocent. I spread them out on the desk. Payroll summaries, vendor lists, dates that didn't line up unless you wanted them to. I sat down and opened my laptop. The server password hadn't changed. It never did. His name. A number after it. Predictable. The files came up slow, one after another. Expense reports labeled retreat, travel receipts, villas, private chefs, all logged as strategy sessions. I stared at the location line longer than I meant to. St. Bart's. Again and again. My hands didn't shake. That surprised me. Halfway through copying the files, my phone buzzed. A message from Victoria, sent hours earlier. "Don't forget the blue folder in the cabinet. Dad will be furious." I found the cabinet. The brass key hung on a hook inside the desk. He'd left it there like a challenge, like a dare. We've watched how confidence makes people careless, how control can turn into habit. The cabinet opened with a dull scrape. Deeds. Original statements. Printed emails I remembered typing. I stacked them carefully into a bag I'd brought from my car. Waterproof. Plain. When the transfer finished, I closed everything down, wiped the keyboard, the desk, the handle. On the kitchen island, the binder still sat where I'd left it. I placed the cabinet key on top and slid a yellow note underneath the clip. "I'm done protecting this." I didn't look back when I walked out. I left the door unlocked. They found me 3 days later. I was staying with Eleanor, folding laundry at the small table by the window, when her phone rang. She glanced at the screen and slid it toward me without a word. My father's voice came through tight and clipped. "Where are you safe?" I said, and finished. "You took things that don't belong to you," he snapped. "Files, drives." I leaned back in the chair. Everything I touched already belonged to the government. They just didn't know it yet. There was a pause. Then Miles cut in. Louder. "You think this is clever? You just burned every bridge." I stopped standing on the one you kept lighting on fire. "We've heard this moment before the second when certainty slips and people start reaching." My father spoke again, slower now. "You don't understand what you've done." "I understand exactly," I said. "That's why I left." The line went quiet. No goodbye. No threat that landed. I handed the phone back to Eleanor. She nodded once. Like this was confirmation. Not surprise. Outside, a car passed. Normal traffic. Ordinary afternoon. I went back to folding towels, careful to match the corners. It didn't end with sirens or shouting. It ended with emails. Formal ones. Polite ones. Words like pending and under review and effective immediately. Accounts frozen. Properties listed. Meetings canceled without explanation. I read everything once. Then I stopped checking. Months later, the letter arrived confirming the whistleblower award. $4.2 million, spelled out across 2 pages, tied to recovery amounts and cooperation timelines. I folded it back into the envelope and set it in a drawer. Not celebration money, just weight finally lifted. I moved into a small house not far from Eleanor's. 1 floor, big windows, quiet mornings. I started consulting part-time. Nothing flashy. Compliance work, cleanup. The kind of work people only notice when it's missing. Sometimes Eleanor would ask, gently, "Do you miss them?" I'd think about it before answering. "I miss who I thought I was with them," I told her once, not who they actually were. We didn't talk about the trial much. I read the sentencing summary online. William Harper and Miles Thornton. Tax fraud. Conspiracy. Years. Not decades. Enough. One afternoon, I drove past the old house in Old Westbury. A real estate sign leaned slightly to one side. The windows were bare. No flowers. No noise. I didn't stop the car. That was when it settled. Fully. I hadn't ruined anything. I had stepped out of a role that required me to disappear. Rosalind Harper used to measure herself by how much damage she could absorb without showing it. Now I measure my days by quieter things. Mornings without dread. Work that ends when it's supposed to. Saying no without rehearsing it first. We'll leave it here. Some stories don't need an ending that echoes. If this one stayed with you, you know why.